Hello, everyone. I'm Daniel. I am a software engineer. I work in this company called Recon. We specialize in optimization problems, but we also do bespoke software, so check us out if you're interested. And today I want to talk about logging, more concretely about the standard libraries logger that we have in Python. Logging is a topic that I think probably doesn't get talked about enough in terms of how we do it. So it's something I wanted to cover. And we do have a standard logger in Python that kind of comes bundled with the language, which is not a given. Not all languages have this. So I think it's good if we make use of this, or we can learn how it works to improve our logging practices, hopefully, and also get into the conversation to how what makes for good logging and what doesn't. So yeah, without further ado, I'll start. So this is the standard library. You can import it with logging. It's a very old library. This is not necessarily bad. In fact, what you're seeing here, I don't know if you'll be able to see it from the back, but what you're seeing here is the GitHub repo for CPython, and you'll see that some of the comments there are from or some of the Git blames are from 20 years ago and stuff like that. Again, not necessarily bad. In fact, I think it may prove the fact that reliable code can live for decades without necessarily requiring big changes. However, it does mean that if you do want to take a peek at this, which I actually recommend, it's not this is not C. It's not something very foreign to you. If you read through this, you will be able to understand it. However, you will not see things like, for example, f strings or any of the more modern constructs that we have in Python nowadays. It's a bit old-fashioned, and it carries with it a lot of abstraction, and that means that it's a bit verbose if you do want to set up your logger. What you see on the right is an example of a dictionary-based configuration. This is taken straight up from the Python documentation, and as you see, that's quite a bit of text, which you probably may not be able to read. So that's, I think, all the bad things that we can say about that, which is actually not much. It's a reliable library, and well, it comes with the language, so it is my preference to use the built-in constructs instead of taking external libraries. However, just for completeness sake, I will mention some of the alternatives that you have. Structlog exists. This is a well-known library. It focuses on structure logging. This is a practice that I will be going a bit deeper into later, although it's not all that hard to understand. The main appeal for this, as you see straight up in the GitHub repo in the first kind of sentence, is that it's easier to set up. I will say that that's kind of true, maybe, but in the end, if you do still want to format your logs, you'll still have to write boilerplate. That's how it goes, sorry. So, you can use this if you're interested. It's very good. It has a ton, as you see, 22 million downloads. It's very widely used, and I can definitely recommend it. I just won't go over it, and my slight preference is to go with what we're given, but definitely check this out. Another alternative is PyCon logging. So, this one is interesting. This one is, as you see, created by, or it's under the Microsoft repo. There are some caveats with this, though. The first is the warning that you see right there, which says that it's in beta. So I guess I cannot recommend it for production usage yet. More on this is that although it's under the Microsoft repo, if you actually check the comments, it's like one guy working on this. So it's not like they have a whole team of people iterating on this library. And finally, it shares kind of the API with the standard Python logger. So everything that I will talk about here will apply to this. So whenever you want to switch, you'll be able to without too many heavy changes. Also, the main appeal of this is that it's apparently much faster than the standard Python logger, which is it's fine, but that would, if you are not finding problems with your performance in logging, I would argue that this might start to sound like premature optimization if you straight up reached out for this without the need for it. So that makes it for the alternatives for now. We'll see one more later, but that's spoilers. And I will go now into the library's kind of concept. It's a bit of a concept-heavy library. It's not like you start logging straight away. Maybe some of you just outright print your logs out, and then you find them. However, I certainly do that sometimes. most of the times. But the standard Python logger has a bunch of concepts that you kind of need to understand in order to set it up correctly. So the first one is the logger itself. This is the interface that you will use to interact with the library. This is the API, basically. And you can also instantiate many instances of this. We'll see how that plays out later. You also have the handlers. The handlers are more or less the pathways for where your logs end up getting to. Python bundles a bunch of these, so it's usual. Like normally, you won't have to code this yourself. And if you want to send your log somewhere else, or you have a specific use case, it is very common that you will be able to find this and not have to roll your own. However, you can actually do it. It's not rocket science. It's relatively understandable. Filters are interesting because a filter, you might think it's a filter, but it's not. So it's called filter, but you can think of it as like a middleware. It's a function that you can modify the log before it kind of gets sent out. The real, let's say, one creative use case for this is to use your filter function as a closure to inject context from outside of the function into the log. I understand that this is kind of abstract, just speaking it without seeing it. I recommend you check out the link that I leave there if you're interested in seeing how this plays out in reality. The filter basically does whatever you want it to. It's just a function, and it doesn't necessarily filter things out if you don't want it to. I will also take this opportunity to mention that you'll see I'm taking you to the logging cookbook in the Python docs. I think this is very interesting. I think you should check it out. It's a documentation page that's kind of thrown together, not particularly well structured, but it does have a lot of information about different kind of recipes and a lot of different constructs and build methods for how and suggestions for how to structure your logs. So check it out. A lot of historical knowledge, let's say, built there. Finally, it's the formatter. This is mostly what you will be interacting with, like the bulk of your logic into how you want to structure your logs will go inside of this formatter. Nowadays, I think everyone will want to log JSON. I will go deeper into why later. You can roll your own JSON formatter. It's very simple, actually. If you feel lazy, you can also just use the repo that already rolls it for you. But it makes for a fine exercise, and if you're not a fan of dragging dependencies into your project, and you might not be if you do want to use the default logger, it's simple to do. All right. Then there's the log levels. I won't spend too much time on this because I think everyone is familiar with the log levels. You have different ones, and you use them for different situations. Nothing to comment on this. So this is more or less how the logger is actually built. You have a root logger, which contains handlers, and these handlers contain your filters and your formatters and your levels and all of that. So it builds on top of another. It's kind of built on top of another one, and then you instantiate different loggers depending on your modules, or at least that's how it's supposed to be. And all those loggers propagate. So what does this mean? It means that when you generate a log in a submodule deep down in your Python code, the log will get processed by your logger, and then the logger will actually throw it up to the parent logger, and they're on forever and ever until it reaches the root logger. This makes for some kind of funny mechanisms that maybe don't work as you would expect them to, because the logic, let's say, can repeat itself many times if you're not careful, especially if you assign, let's say, handlers or similar formatters to all of these different loggers. So I will go a bit later. I'll give you some tips later into how to kind of square this circle and what it means in practice. For now, the first tip I want to give is to use dict-config. So there are many ways of configuring the Python logger. The most straightforward is using just the API of the logger itself. So you write your code, and in your code you say you instantiate your handler, you instantiate your formatter, you assign it to the logger. All of this. However, there are other ways, and other ways which are, in my opinion, better. There's file config, which is now I think de facto deprecated. I don't think people are using it anymore. The more recent option, and the one I recommend, is using dictconfig. It's basically a dictionary which configures your logger. Why this is better than doing it in code is because I think no code is better than code. So if you can avoid writing code, that's better. This also, by the way, allows you to store your configuration in maybe a static file. So you can maybe dump this into a JSON or a YAML file and then load it into your configuration. You have to do the marshalling, but you know. Finally, one last thing I want to talk about in relation to the logger structure, and then I'll go more into what I suggest you do and what I suggest you don't, are the queue handler and the queue listener. So logs are blocking in at least on paper. Whenever you do something, and especially if it's something that takes a lot of time, the example that they give here is sending an email. You are going to be waiting for a while. So if you are seeing performance problems, or you just want to have a cleaner structure where your logs are processed in a different thread, you need to use these two things right here. The API, I've highlighted the important parts of the API. The way that this works is that you have a handler. The handler provided here, the queue handler, is actually the handler that you see right there. So when you see email handler or journal D handler, that exists. That's actually the queue handler. It takes a queue, and that's a normal Python queue. So you create a queue, and then besides that, you instantiate this listener, which is constantly listening to this queue, or it subscribes to this queue, and you also give it the handlers that you want your code to function with. What ends up happening is that the handler puts the messages in the queue, and then the listener on another thread dequeues based on what it sees there. The obvious benefit is that, as I mentioned, you're not blocking your application code. Now, before 3.12, we didn't have support for this in dictconfig, so you would have to do something like this. The code you see is more or less the actual real-life version of what I've just verbally went through. You instantiate your handler, your listener, and then you start your queue, and things start working. Luckily, we have support for this in dictconfig now, so this is how you set it up. Inside of your handlers, the dictconfig spec, let's say, or the dictconfig document contains a bunch of keys and values, which I think wouldn't make much sense to go over. You can look at that yourself and understand it better than I can explain it. But one of those, for the handlers, you instantiate your queue list, or you declare your queue listener, you declare your handler, and that's it. This works. Be mindful that you will still have to start your queue through the handler that you're given, though. So this won't work straight away. You'd still need a line of code. Sorry, it's the way it is. Actually, I'm kind of lying. You can high order your listener so that you have a listener that starts a queue, and then you do without this. You can have a higher abstraction level. I don't know if it's worth it, but it's elegant if you're into that kind of thing. So I'm going to start now with some of the tips I have and some of the things I think you might want to take out from this. These are my opinion. Feel free to debate me. You're wrong if you disagree, but you're free to I'm kidding. You can disagree, and it makes for an interesting conversation, and I don't think we have enough of these in regards to logging, so feel free to comment on this. You're wrong, but you can. So my suggestion first is that you assign all the filters and handlers to the root logger. Why? Because the propagation is very confusing. So if you have a child log, let's actually go back to the diagram so I can so you can have a visual interpretation of what I mean. Let's say you have a child from module 1 logger, and let's say you have a filter which apparently, let's say that in that filter you block all your logs. What do you think happens? Do you think that gets logged, or does it not get logged? You might think it doesn't get logged. It actually gets logged twice, because it gets logged in the parent, and then it gets logged on the root logger. So even if the filter you use to filter logs, it's actually only going to work for the local module that you're declaring it for, like only for the local logger that you're declaring it for. Logs propagate always. This makes for very confusing logic, and in my opinion, although the logger kind of abstraction might be useful for some cases, I haven't really been able to justify it too much for most applications. My suggestion then is that you declare all your logs or your handlers and all your formatters directly to the root logger. What you get with this is a lot of things. First off, you do without all of this bizarre propagation logic. It's very rare, in my opinion, that you will need to log the same thing twice. If you really want to be sure of what you're doing, I guess feel free. And if you want to pay twice for your logging aggregator, they will be very happy to take the money from you. But it also makes for very confusing things because you don't know if a thing happened twice or it's only been logged twice. So my suggestion is that you do without this entirely. You will need to instantiate your loggers, or it's recommended that you do, but leave them empty and let them propagate to the root, and then you process in the root. Another plus you get by using this this kind of logic is that if you have a library and that library, for whatever reason, calls the root logger directly, or it instantiates its own logger, the logs that that library will produce will be formatted in the same shape as the ones that you yourself are producing. Maybe it's arguable that you want this, but I think you do. I don't think it's good to have 90% of your logs as JSON and then a library logging a string there somewhere. You would be very, very hard to track. So you also get that by assigning things directly to the root. That's my first tip. More on this is that you do not call the root logger directly. So you can access the root logger directly from the logger module. I don't think this is necessarily good. I think, in fact, it's quite bad. So the role that the loggers are going to play in our application is to know who is producing the log itself. So what you're actually going to be propagating upwards is the name of the module that's generating the log. If you decide to call the root logger directly, you're losing that context. You are going to be, like all of the logs, are going to be called as if the root logger was producing them, which, as far as Python is concerned, is correct. However, you won't know where they're coming from. So I do not recommend to call the root logger directly. Next up is being careful with the logs you instantiate. Now, this is slightly more controversial. So I will tell you what it's recommended and what's standard. What's recommended is that you take your getLogger function, which is the one that creates the logger, and you use the dunder name, and that grabs your module's name, and that's it. You have instantiated a new logger for your module. However, if you read into the documentation, you are never freeing that memory. So it's not like you have a potential memory leak. I guess the number of potential loggers you can instantiate is bounded by how many modules are in your application. However, I would argue that you don't necessarily need that much. The point of all of these loggers is to know where they're being generated from. If you can get away with having a sensible module structure or having a sensible naming structure, and you know where your logs are coming from by the names that you give them, or just being careful and not creating a module for every file you have or module, you might get away with less memory usage, and it might be slightly cleaner. This is maybe controversial, but I don't think you constantly every time need to create a new logger for everything. What I show below is the API for Loguru. This is another one of the logging libraries that you might be interested in. Not much to comment. It's there, and it's also very widely used. What I want to bring to your attention here is that so the creators from this library do away with the logger abstraction entirely. They have only one logger and no more. We are kind of replicating this in a way with the tip that I gave you before, which is to have your loggers be as dumb as possible and have all the logic in your root. So, food for thought. They think it's good, and I tend to agree. Now, I want to go into structure logging. So what is this? It's not that complicated. The point of this buzzword is that your logs nowadays are being read by machines. You're not going to be the first person to take a look at the logs. So it kind of makes sense to structure those logs as if machines were going to parse them, because that's actually what's going to be happening. So a log that says, hello, I'm user module and I crashed, close string, is very verbose and maybe descriptive. But if you're trying to find that in a nest of a trillion log entries, you might find yourself in trouble, because that's not really easy for machines to parse. So the point of structured logging is to think as a machine and to use, first off, a format which allows you to structure the logs in key value pairs so that you can organize the logs in that way. And that, whenever you use a log aggregator for something, you can filter by these different keys and receive the values in a cleaner way. So you'll spend less time digging through the logs and more time actually finding what you want. Also, of course, based on the fact that nowadays logging is relatively cheap, I think you can afford to be very liberal with how many things you log. I don't think anyone has a problem of logging too much. If anything, the opposite. So this also allows you to be very generous with the amount of things that you log and not necessarily have to care about noise, because you will be able to get to the signal very, very efficiently. There's a blog post below. It kind of expands on this. I recommend you read it. There's another personal opinion I want to give, and this is more of a conversation starter. But I have been, I'm interested in this, so I read blog posts. I tend to investigate what people think. And there's this article where it says, unpopular opinion, use debug level in production. Now, I don't necessarily agree with this, but not because I'm against logging a lot in production. My point is that there is sensitive information that you might not want to log in production at all. So my suggestion, and what I want to throw out as I said, as a conversation starter, don't take this as gospel, this is my opinion. But I think it might be useful for you to consider the lower, let's say the lower debug levels, or the less relevant ones like debug or info, as how much information they are hiding. So when you configure your logger for production usage, you are not logging private or personal information, or basically anything that you don't want to be lingering around in some log mechanism somewhere. And leave the rest of the logs as verbose and basically log all the rest. The other kind of flip side of this is that I don't think that there are, I guess I agree with the bulk of this comment that I'm linking here. I don't think that there are logs irrelevant enough to not be in production. Like, if you want to log something, why wouldn't you want to have it where you can find it? That's my opinion. You might disagree, but my suggestion or my take is that you can use these logger levels as a kind of a stop for sensitive information, which you can have in your local environment, and prevent that from going into production. Finally, to finish up with this, I want to rant a little bit about logging. I mentioned before that I think we're not talking about these things enough. What you're seeing here is actually Google Trends. So I checked out how many people look for PyTest and how many people look for just generically logging and Python logger and things like that. As you see, both combined don't even reach to like maybe half of what people are looking for in PyTest. This to me is slightly concerning, and I have more examples. I don't think this is only a matter of, so I don't think this is only a Python problem, to be fair. What you see here is the NPM package download metrics. In case you are not aware, JavaScript, these are JavaScript libraries, and the most common logging libraries for JavaScript are Pinot and Winston. And as you see, the same thing happens. So Jest, the most popular testing framework for JavaScript, is exponentially more popular than both of those combined. I I take issue with this. I think that we are not paying enough attention to the things we log. I think that, I mean, testing is important, and it took us years of kind of evangelizing the importance of testing to be able to have what we do now, which are very thorough testing methodologies. We have like TDD. We have all of these things which are meant for us to produce more solid and reliable code and to encourage best practice. And I don't think we are, like, I think logging has been kind of forgotten, which I'm angry about. I don't like that. I want to make logging more important. I want to have time for logging. I want to be able to tell people I'm going to improve the logging structure of our application and have that be kind of respected and people seeing that that provides actual real value. Because you can test as much as you want, but logs are going to slip, or bugs are going to slip through to production eventually, no matter what you do. So you know from experience that finding the bug is like the hardest part of debugging. Once you have the bug, you normally know what to change. So that's basically the rant. I want to talk more about this. I want this to be more present, and I don't think that this is something that we can individually, change from day to night. But I just want to throw the topic out there, and I want to say that if we kind of group together and start talking more about best logging practices, how to do logging better, and preaching more about the importance of doing these things, we can save ourselves a lot of time, a lot of debugging, which is never fun, a lot of money for these companies which don't have solid logging structures, which are most of them. I have never really seen a project in which people are completely 100% satisfied with how much they are logging. And that's it. That's kind of what I wanted to throw out there. So I hope you agree. If you don't, I hope you have fun debugging. And that's it. I guess I'm open for questions. And thank you for listening.
Thanks. So I have audio here. Yeah, thanks, Danielle, for your logging insights and provocative thoughts. So you intend to initiate a discussion, and I see a hand wanting to feed you on that discussion. So let me get here, excuse me. There you go.
Hey, I totally agree with you on the importance of logging. I think it's really useful for me. And you give value to it when you have a bug. But I wanted to ask you, like you said, we have a lot of information on good testing practices, TDD, and so on, which is also very important. But what I particularly don't find is good information on good logging practices. Because, okay, logs are good, but we shouldn't also log just for the sake of logging, because logs also have a cost. And something that I've noticed is that, okay, in my company we started logging, and that's positive, but sometimes people go from 8 to 80 and they start logging all over the place. And then when we search for those logs, it's a lot of information, excess information. And I would like to ask you if you have some suggestions or some good information on good logging practices and how should we log and when should we log?
Yep. So thank you for that. You actually just unlocked a secret slide. Congratulations. So I didn't think I would have time for this, but you actually brought it up. So secret slide unlocked. These are some of my other opinions on good logging practices. I guess you can read through this now that the topic has come up. In general, I do 100% agree. We don't have enough topics, and we don't have enough documentation about what makes for good logging practices. It's part of why I wanted to make this talk. There are things out there like the structure logging kind of buzzword, which is it's part of getting there, but it's, I guess, not as deep as to make for comprehensive methodology. So on the topic of logging a lot, I am as you see right there on the last bullet point, I think I'd rather log too much than too little. And my, let's say, knee-jerk reaction is that if you are having trouble with too many logs, the problem might be how you are finding them or how you are parsing through them rather than how much you're actually logging. So we have all these different tools like log levels. We have if you structure by key value pairs and you are able to filter through them. So the main point of having a logging structure is to be able to filter and parse through that very quickly so that you filter out the noise. I think you can log too much and be completely crazy and overboard, but I think that even if you do, it's better than logging too little. And if you get to that point, it might be worth looking into how you are discerning your logs from one another, how are you filtering through them, and how do you find things within those logs in order to save, to cut the search time instead of cutting the logging. Mm-hmm. That would be like my, first impulse reaction. Then again, of course, you can make very stupid logs which don't add anything, but even then, I would rather log too many stupid things than none of the smart ones. So yeah, that's it. I also, on the topic of good logging practices, I'm now realizing that I kind of left out one relatively important topic, which is where you end up dumping these logs. So my suggestion in this case is to get yourself with like a platform that displays everything nicely. I know that if you look at the sponsors of the conference, people are maybe doing this. They are among us. Oh, I said the funny word. But it doesn't matter which one you choose, and there are open source solutions too. Trade-offs between managed services and unmanaged services apply. Pick your poison. But I think that it's don't just log into a text file in a packet and grep or AWK your way through it. Treat yourself better than that. Use a logging platform that allows you to quickly filter and parse through all of these things. I should have mentioned, I guess, that in the talk, but I went too fast. So now you know.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, anyone else wants to join our discussion? Are we happy about logging? Oh, there we go.
Thank you. Thank you for the talk. It was amazing. I have a question, or I'm wondering if you have an opinion whether or not it's better to use something like f-strings to embed variables into the logs, or pass them separately as parameters to the logging function.
That's a very good question. That's a very, very good question. Let me go back to the very first one of the very first slides. What you're seeing here in the struct log library, which, as I mentioned, kind of the point of it is that it makes it easier for you to do structure logging. If you look at the kind of example of the API that they give, you will see that they actually pass parameters into the logging function. The reason is that it allows you to do this key value separation better. So if you're doing f-strings, you're maybe doing string logging. I mean, not necessarily, but probably. So it's better to have a function that kind of takes all of these arguments and discerns between them. So my preference would be, or if you're doing structure logging, which again, it's a buzzword, if you find a better way of doing this, feel free. But my gut feeling is that it's better to use functions and it's more syntactic for this kind of thing. And yeah, in fact, the haters will say that what struct-log, this library does is just take your KW args and dump them into JSON. I mean, I'm not a hater, but if you want to look at it that way, I guess it's kind of true. So yeah, that's my answer.
Cool, thank you.
Who's next? You.
Super quick one. So I agree with everything that you said, and the presentation was great. Something that I saw from past experience is that mostly developers will agree with you, like logging is good. But unfortunately, sometimes the decision on less logging is not coming from developers. It's coming from the people with the money saying, oh, logging is too expensive because we're aggregating them and we have to cut costs and so you have to log less. So what would be a good argument to convince those people that we need more logging?
So I actually don't know. It's a very good, I mean, it's the $1 million question. I totally agree with you. I'm going to be snarky and I'm going to say that we somehow conned companies into paying us for writing tests before we actually write code. And that seems very backwards, and tests don't really produce any money. So if we manage to trick people into this, I imagine there must be a way of tricking them also into making some sort of logging practice that allows us to do our job properly without having to cut corners. I guess we may have to group up and find some new cool buzzword or methodology that we can sell courses on so that we can get certified and charge a lot of money for implementing it. So yeah, no idea, but my feeling is that if it does happen and when it happens, it may take that path. It may be something like that, and I'm hoping it happens. Actually, like I'm being facetious, but I think that's how it's going to happen the day it actually happens.
Thank you, thank you.
And who's next? We have more participants here. We do. I'll go here. I like that idea. Let's form a team and create a methodology. Where are we?
There you go.
Really great presentation. I also agree basically with everything. And first thing I'll say is I also use debug on production.
Nice.
Okay. I work on embedded systems. So they are deployed whenever. They might not even have network, but they might still be working. It might be still important to keep logging. And it's actually the only tool I have. And sometimes if I find a bug, I have to use print. So most of the tools or TDDs or whatever are not even available while I'm in production, or I have to debug something really quickly. So what I want to reinforce on your idea is that logging too much is never enough. Log more and more, and I already saved my arse, sorry, a lot of times because I logged a lot, and I knew, okay, this is the bug. And most of the systems I developed alone because of my work situation, okay? And the first thing we drop when we don't have time, let's be honest about that, is tests. So what is left? Logging. Logging is one line that you write and is there. And that's what I do. So I think it was a very interesting presentation to mess up with our brains and maybe change a bit the way we write code and deploy it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. That's very heartwarming coming from a, I guess, embedded systems programmer. I think the log too much and don't care about what you're logging mostly applies to overweight web services with 5 layers of abstraction and things like this where performance is actually not an issue. I can imagine how in maybe embedded systems it actually becomes very expensive to log things, and you have to be careful with what you put out there so that your system, your mini chip doesn't get blocked by the heavy Python interpreter. But if even you say that it's worth the extra cost of logging, then I feel more reassured now. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, and we have time for one last question or two, couple of questions. Let's see. Caio, there you go.
Hi. In my experience, like sometimes when we're working with web applications like microservices, we start with logging, but sometimes someone came up, hey, like we need some metrics here, like so how many purchases have, how many transactions, and we started creating metrics, like for example, Grafana, Prometheus, and then eventually start changing from logging to using those metrics, like gathering them, looking at them, like because they, at least my perspective, they are much more rich in the sense of like what we are doing. Like, and they have I can sell much easier the business value for that. Hey, how much sales are we doing per second? I can sell that and so forth. And I can relate that to sometimes like CPU memory and go for. So in my experience, like I'm interested in what your thoughts are. Like, I can start with logging. Log like is the basic thing. I can log anything, anytime. But if I start making that structure in the sense of creating metrics, dashboards, and using those to create like alerts and stuff for me, to inform myself, like that's also a possible way to go. Like I want to know your thoughts. Like instead of logging, like creating metrics and having like that huge system of telemetry about like how things are working. Because if something doesn't work, I will have an alert. I will know where that issue happened. I can work with it. Like then I will look at the logs.
Yeah, that's actually how we sell companies into like making logging important. I mean I agree. I think these are slightly different problems actually. So all these metrics things and log aggregators and things like that are I guess one step above in the let's say abstraction chain than the actual bottom line of putting the log in your code. I do agree that you need that and that is very beneficial. It's also one of the benefits of structuring your logs properly is that you can make sense of them and machines can parse them and aggregate them in ways in which make for good insights. So I do agree. It's I mean that is very useful and that it's very good. There is, however, already quite a sizable market for that, and I feel like you can find many places or you can find many services which tell you about how many CPU usage your Kubernetes node is having currently, but I don't feel like there's enough talk about how do I set up my Python logger or should I log the user ID for this transaction or not. So I mean I agree. I think it's true, and I actually, as I said before, I do recommend that you use some kind of log aggregator in order to get more insights about all of this stuff. Like don't dump logs into text and then leave them there. That's not developer experience. But yeah, I guess the point I was trying to drive was a bit more hands-on in terms of the code, and that's a bit slight step above. But I do think that step is important and also should be considered. So yeah, I agree.
Okay, and now that is a wrap on logging. Let's thank Daniel thanks for his insights on logging. Thank you, Daniel.